Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine one of the most iconic symbols of modern air superiority. The stealth fighter that looked like it flew straight out of science fiction, the F-22 Raptor. For years, the conversation felt like it was winding down, anticipating its eventual retirement to make way for the next big thing.
Yeah, there was definitely a sense its time was limited,
Right.
a clear path planned for its successor program, NGAD, to take over maybe early 2030s.
But if you've been following defense news at all lately, you know that story took, well, a pretty unexpected turn. Suddenly, this legendary jet is getting some serious cutting-edge upgrades. It's having a major modernization moment right now.
And that pivot is fascinating because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's fundamentally linked to the status and trajectory, sometimes turbulent, of that planned successor program, the U.S. Air Force's Next Generation Air Dominance Initiative, NGAD.
So, for this deep dive, we've pulled together a stack of sources that capture this dynamic picture. We're looking at recent news releases from the big players like Lockheed Martin and RTX, digging into some smart defense industry analysis, and even sifting through discussions from folks deep in the weeds, following these developments online.
Right. Those sources give us the raw material to understand not just the what's of these upgrades, but the why, the strategic calculations, the technical realities driving these decisions. It's all connected.
Our mission today is to go beyond just summarizing the headlines. We want to extract the truly important nuggets, the specifics of what's being added to the F-22, understand why this older, expensive jet is suddenly back in the modernization spotlight, and figure out what this complex situation tells us about the path towards future air superiority. Let's jump into what's actually happening with the Raptor itself.
Okay, well, one of the most striking pieces of news our sources cover is a major contract announced back in January 2025, about $270 million awarded to Lockheed Martin by the Air Force, specifically for F-22 upgrades.
Wow, $270 million dollars on a jet that was, like you said, being discussed for retirement. That's not pocket change. What exactly is that chunk of money buying?
So this contract is focused on a new defensive sensor system, integrating a next-generation set of embedded infrared sensors. They're calling it the Infrared Defensive System, or IRDS. Think of it as a distributed network of these tackier sensors across the aircraft.
Infrared. So, sensing heat signatures. Is this about giving the F-22 better awareness of incoming missiles or other heat-emitting threats? Like other aircraft, maybe?
Exactly. According to Lockheed Martin officials quoted in the sources like Hank Tucker, the goal is explicitly to make the Raptor more survivable and lethal, that's the phrase they use, against current and future threats. Justin Taylor from Lockheed's F-22 program called it an essential modernization effort that leverages their deep fifth-generation expertise.
Okay.
It's really about enhancing the F-22's ability to detect and counter threats passively,
Yeah.
without relying solely on radar, which is crucial in environments where radar might be jammed or where adversaries are trying to stay stealthy themselves.
Right, passive detection is huge. So it's not just adding one new gizmo, but integrating a whole new capability across the jet. Are there other significant upgrades happening according to these sources?
Oh, definitely.
Hmm.
The modernization isn't limited to just sensors. There are mentions of ongoing improvements to the F-22's core muscle, the Pratt & Whitney F-119 engine. This is the engine legendary for enabling the F-22's supercruise.
Ah, Super Cruise. Flying supersonic without afterburners, that's absolutely key to the Raptor's unique performance profile, isn't it?
It really is. And Pratt & Whitney is reportedly using data from flight operations to refine the engine software, aiming to boost its kinetic performance even further. Plus, they're using data analytics to optimize maintenance schedules, which helps drive down those significant operating costs people often talk about with the F-22.
Makes sense. Keep it flying longer and better. And you can't talk about fighter upgrades without mentioning its punch the weapons. What's happening there?
Absolutely critical. Our sources highlight significant work on the AIM-120D3 AMRAAM missile by Raytheon. This updated version reportedly doubles its effective range compared to earlier variants.
Doubled. Hold on. Without changing the rocket motor, how on earth did they pull that off?
Yeah, that's the impressive part. According to the sources, Raytheon achieved this by optimizing the missile's flight profile. Basically, by flying a smarter, more energy-efficient trajectory, the missile conserves speed and energy over a much greater distance before it goes for the kill.
Wow.
Plus, the D3 has enhanced resistance to electronic jamming, making it much more reliable in contested environments. And Raytheon is reportedly ramping up production on these too.
Doubled range, harder to jam. That dramatically extends the F-22's reach in air-to-air combat. That's a huge deal.
It really is. And the sensor story extends beyond just the IRDS. Raytheon also received a substantial contract over $1 billion back in September 2024 for unspecified sensor improvements across the fleet.
$1 billion for
Yeah.
sensors.
Yep. And Collins Aerospace is working on the cockpit side of things, developing technologies to help pilots manage and make sense of all this increased data flow from the new sensors and systems. Information overload is a real risk.
So it's a sweeping effort. Sensors, engines, weapons, pilot interfaces, they're not just keeping it going, they're making it significantly more capable than it was even just a few years ago.
It really shows a fundamental change in thinking compared to the earlier talk of retirement, doesn't it? The sources even include that fantastic quote from a former F-22 pilot comparing the startup to a big muscle car and the flight to a Ferrari, designed to win 100-0. This modernization effort is clearly aimed at preserving and enhancing that level of dominance.
Okay, that makes sense on the tech side. But here's the crucial question, the one you hinted at earlier. Why now? Why pour hundreds of millions, potentially billions, into an older jet that was expected to be phased out by the 2030s? What changed?
This is where the connection to NGAD becomes absolutely critical. The sources make it pretty clear that the primary driver for this F-22 life extension and modernization, potentially keeping it competitive until 2040 now, is the fact that the planned replacement, the crewed component of the Next Generation Air Dominance program, has faced, well, delays and uncertainty.
Okay. So the future isn't arriving quite as quickly as hoped, and the Air Force needs a top-tier air superiority fighter in the meantime. They can't afford a gap.
Precisely. One source puts the projected cost for maintaining and modernizing the F-22 fleet over the next several years at a staggering $10 billion. It's a huge commitment, but one deemed necessary because, as sources quote Air Combat Command Chief General Wilsbach saying, frankly, there isn't F-22 replacement ready to step in today.
And that need for a high-end capability now is heavily influenced by the evolving global security picture, right? The sources explicitly link this modernization drive to emerging threats and rival technologies.
Absolutely. Discussions in the sources, including debates among defense followers online, point directly to advancements by potential adversaries like China and Russia. Their next-generation fighter programs like China's J-20, their progress in UAVs and other capabilities. The U.S. military needs to maintain its air superiority advantage, and the F-22 is the primary tool for that at the high end until NGAD is fully operational.
And despite the F-35 being incredibly capable and numerous, the sources suggest the F-22 still brings some unique advantages to the fight that are particularly relevant today, especially maybe in certain regions.
That's a key debate highlighted in the sources, definitely. The F-22's specific blend of stealth, its supercruisability, and raw kinematic performance is argued by some to be uniquely suited for certain scenarios, particularly the vast distances and operational tempo needed in the Indo-Pacific theater.
Right, the tyranny of distance out there.
Exactly. Its speed and ability to operate supersonic without draining fuel reserves is seen by some as a critical advantage that the F-35, while incredibly versatile, doesn't fully replicate for that pure air superiority role. This makes the F-22 vital for maintaining air dominance, homeland defense against things like cruise missiles, and supplementing the F-35 fleet in really high-threat areas.
It sounds like the F-22 isn't just treading water, it's actively being leveraged for the future as well, not just filling a gap.
That's a really interesting angle. This modernization isn't just about keeping an old jet relevant. Sources, like those quoting Brig General Voorhees, describe the F-22 serving as a bridge to NGAD. It's actually being used as a testbed, a proving ground for new NGAD tech, especially those advanced sensors we talked about.
So the F-22 is essentially helping build the very program designed to replace it.
In a way, yes. The Air Dominance Combined Task Force, the ADCTF, is uniquely tasked with both maintaining the F-22's current edge and testing these future capabilities on it. It speaks to the complexity of fielding next-generation systems. You need a platform operating at the edge to test these cutting-edge components in a realistic environment, and the F-22 is the best available for that role right now.
That's a fascinating dynamic using today's top platform to mature tomorrow's technology. All right, let's pivot then to that future. NGAD. We've talked about its delays necessitating the F-22 upgrades, but what is this program supposed to be, according to the sources?
Okay, NGAD, Next Generation Air Dominance. It's the U.S. Air Force's big initiative for sixth-generation air superiority, designed to eventually succeed the F-22. And the sources define it not as a single aircraft, but as a broader family of systems.
A family of systems. That implies more than just a new piloted jet, right? It sounds like a network.
Correct. Well, the core piece is definitely a new crewed fighter aircraft, sometimes called the Penetrating Counter-Air or PCA platform. NGAD is envisioned to operate with a suite of supporting systems. The most prominent are uncrewed collaborative combat aircraft, or CCAs. You often hear them referred to as loyal wingmen.
Loyal wingmen, right. Drones flying alongside the piloted jets.
Yeah, and sources mention expectations of potentially 2 CCAs supporting each crewed NGAD or even F-35 aircraft, so a significant uncrewed component.
So the future is a piloted jet leading a pack of advanced drones. Where did this concept start, and what's the timeline supposed to be?
Well, NGAD traces its origins back to DARPA's Air Dominance Initiative around 2014. The long-standing goal has been to field the new crewed fighter sometime in the 2030s.
And there was a major announcement recently regarding that crewed fighter component, wasn't there?
Yes, a huge piece of news covered in our sources is the Air Force's selection in March 2025. They chose Boeing for the NGAD PCA contract.
Boeing won the bid. That's big, and they've even given it a designation already.
They have. The aircraft will reportedly be designated the F-47. This contract is valued at over $20 billion. And one strategic reason cited for choosing Boeing was to maintain multiple large suppliers capable of developing high-end air dominance platforms within the U.S. defense industrial base, keep competition alive.
That makes sense from an industrial strategy perspective, especially after Northrop Grumman reportedly withdrew from the competition earlier, leaving just Boeing and Lockheed Martin in the running, presumably.
Exactly. However, as we touched on with the F-22, the NGAD program's journey hasn't exactly been smooth sailing. Sources reported comments from Secretary Kendall back in July 2024 suggesting a kind of pause or reassessment on the crewed component.
Pause. That sounds significant.
It did, although later statements, like in March 2025 around the Boeing award, seemed to validate the ongoing need for a crewed 6th-gen aircraft. But there were also discussions about maybe needing to reset requirements.
Reset requirements.
Yeah, that complexity was reflected in comments from Air Force Vice Chief of Staff General Slife in September 2024, quoted in one source, about potentially starting at the beginning with defining requirements. It just shows the inherent difficulty and the evolving nature of designing a system meant to operate decades into the future against unknown threats.
But despite those signals of pause or reassessment, the budget still shows strong commitment, right? Money talks.
It does. The fiscal year 2025 budget request, for instance, allocated a hefty $3.3 billion for NGAD development, and the lion's share, $2.7 billion, was specifically for the manned fighter, plus over $500 million for the CCAs. So while the path might involve adjustments, the financial investment is definitely significant and ongoing.
And there's a powerful argument made in the sources, from veteran perspectives, I think, about why a crewed 6th-gen fighter is absolutely essential, even with all these advanced drones coming online.
That's a key point raised, yeah. Like in the Mitchell Institute podcast excerpt mentioned in one source. The argument is that platforms like the new B-21 stealth bomber, designed to penetrate sophisticated air defenses, will require the support of an equally capable penetrating crewed fighter to clear paths, provide escort, handle complex, dynamic targets in highly contested airspace.
So the drones aren't enough on their own for the toughest jobs.
That's the argument. They argue that while CCAs are vital, there are mission complexities and levels of decision-making, especially under extreme pressure and high risk, that still require a human in the cockpit.
This brings us neatly to some of the key debates and, let's say, differing perspectives that pop up across the sources, especially in those online discussions. It's clear not everyone agrees on the best path forward here.
Oh, absolutely. That Reddit thread we looked at, for instance, is just a microcosm of the broader debates within the defense community, really lively arguments about the F-22's place, NGAD's challenges, the whole 9 yards.
One major point of contention seems to be the perennial F-22 versus F-35 comparison, still going strong.
Right. Some vigorously defend the F-22, arguing its unique capabilities, that combination of stealth, supercruise, maneuverability, make it indispensable for true air superiority missions, especially over vast distances like the Pacific. They contend the F-35, designed as more of a multi-role asset, simply can't replicate that specific blend of speed and reach without hitting the afterburners, which, compromises fuel efficiency and range, impacting how quickly you can tune jets around for more sorties.
And cost is always a factor in those debates, too.
Always. Points are raised about the sheer cost of the planned F-35 procurement numbers and its ongoing operational maintenance expenses compared to potentially keeping a modernized but smaller F-22 fleet relevant.
And the other side of the coin, the suggested reasons for NGAD's pauses or potential troubles. What are people speculating there?
Well, the sources toss around various potential factors. Is it the immense cost of developing not just a new crewed platform, but a whole family of systems? Are there significant technical hurdles in integrating everything seamlessly, especially the CCAs, with the manned fighter? Are requirements constantly shifting, maybe in response to perceived advancements by potential rivals like China?
Or maybe just budget pressures.
That's another possibility mentioned. Simple budgetary pressure from other massive defense programs, like the ongoing replacement of the Minuteman ICBMs, which costs a fortune. The withdrawal of a major competitor like Northrop Grumman before the final decision also added fuel to those questions about the program's stability at the time.
Then there's the really technical debate about the timeless struggle between stealth and detection, specifically the impact of these advanced infrared sensors we talked about earlier. Is stealth becoming obsolete?
This is a fascinating, very detailed point seen in one source. The argument is whether sophisticated infrared search and track systems, IRST, are starting to significantly negate traditional radar stealth. Some sources cite claim detection ranges maybe 55, 65 miles from the rear aspect of a stealth jet, or even speculative Chinese claims of 90, 95 miles. Though everyone acknowledges much shorter ranges from the front, the idea is that heat signatures are fundamentally harder to mask completely than radar reflections.
But is that the whole story? There are counter-arguments to the stealth is dead idea, right?
Definitely. Opponents of that narrative argue that IR-stick systems have key limitations. They often have a narrower field of view compared to radar, meaning they might need external cueing, basically, someone telling the pilot where to point the sensor to be effective for initial search. Radar, they argue, remains the primary tool for broad airspace scanning and fire control.
And stealth isn't just about radar anyway.
Exactly. Stealth is about overall low observability, which includes managing infrared signatures too, not just radar cross-section. The debate also touches on the complexities of ground radar detection and how angled stealth designs perform against radars looking up from different vantage points. It's not a simple equation.
It really highlights that air combat technology is this constant game of cat and mouse. Every advance spurs a counter-advance.
Absolutely. And speaking of potential future counters, some more speculative discussions in the sources touch on rumors or, let's say, analyses of potential Chinese 6th-gen capabilities. Things like concepts for suborbital flight, maybe hypersonic cruising, or novel combined cycle engine designs. These are mentioned as theoretical possibilities that could dramatically alter the requirements for NGAD and fuel ongoing debates about what's needed to stay ahead.
Important to stress those are speculative ideas from the sources, though.
Very much so, framed as discussions and speculations within the source material.
Okay, finally, one really interesting point raised is the role of external influence specifically. Congress in the F-22's continued life. It wasn't just the Air Force deciding this.
That's right. It's noted that Congress has taken direct action. Recent National Defense Authorization Acts, the NDAAs, the bills that actually fund the military, have included specific language explicitly prohibiting the Air Force from retiring F-22s.
Wow. So Congress basically mandated it.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
This congressional mandate has effectively forced the service to extend the F-22's planned life and invest in its modernization, regardless of internal Air Force debates about the optimal force structure or where they might have preferred to put the funding.
So the F-22 is staying relevant due to a perfect storm of factors. NGAD program delays and complexities, the enduring value of its unique capabilities against evolving threats, and even direct orders from Capitol Hill.
It paints a really complex picture of how these massive defense programs are actually managed, with lots of players involved.
Okay, so we've unpacked the specifics, the what, and the why. Why should all of this matter to you listening right now?
Well, because understanding these developments is crucial to understanding the future of air power and, frankly, where significant chunks of taxpayer money are going. These decisions aren't just abstract military planning. They shape national defense strategy, drive massive investments in technology and manufacturing, and are ultimately aimed at ensuring technological superiority in a rapidly changing and sometimes dangerous global landscape.
And it really shows just how complicated maintaining that edge is. It's not a simple matter of swapping out an old jet for a shiny new one. It involves developing this incredibly complex family of systems, juggling immense costs, adapting constantly to new threats as they emerge, and having to maintain critical capabilities today because the future technology isn't quite ready yet, or is taking longer than expected.
Yeah, the real aha moment here, I think, is that the F-22 isn't just an old plane getting patched up out of necessity. It's a critical high-end capability for today, and it's actively serving as a vital test bed, a bridge for the very technology that will hopefully deliver tomorrow's air dominance with NGAD.
And the path to that next generation NGAD is proving to be anything but straightforward. It involves strategic pauses, technical challenges, intense debates among experts about fundamental concepts like stealth versus sensors, and constant adaptation based on what potential rivals might be developing. It's a really dynamic and challenging process.
It's a continuous effort to stay ahead, with incredibly high stakes.
So to quickly recap what we've covered in this deep dive, the F-22 Raptor is receiving significant cutting-edge modernization. This move is largely driven by the complex reality and the timeline shifts of its planned successor, the NGAD program. NGAD is moving forward, with Boeing selected to build the core crewed fighter, the F-47, but the program's scope, timing, and the technologies within it are still subject to debate and adjustment. The F-22, far from fading away, is serving as a critical platform, providing air dominance now and acting as a vital bridge to this developing, uncertain future.
It's a really clear illustration of that difficult balancing act between maintaining current capability and investing in future development.
Which leaves us with this final thought for you to chew on. Considering the rapid pace of technological evolution, the escalating costs of these cutting-edge platforms, and the ongoing debates about the fundamental effectiveness of technologies like stealth versus advanced sensors, maybe even hypersonic capabilities down the line, what is the optimal strategy for the U.S. moving forward? Should the priority be heavily on incremental upgrades for proven, albeit expensive, platforms like the F-22, or should it be on pushing harder and faster into the ambitious, complex, and maybe riskier system of systems approach of NGAD, even with its uncertainties? How does that fundamental tension between maintaining dominance today and developing capabilities for the future shape the direction of military aviation?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question defense strategists are grappling with every single day.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the F-22 and the future of air dominance. We hope you found it insightful.
Yeah, we appreciate you listening in.
We'll see you on the next one.